It's the biggest threat to our farms and countryside. Bovine tuberculosis has wiped out herds in the northwest and it's steadily spreading. Our region has become the front line in the battle against the disease, with new measures introduced here this month to bring it under control. But Inside Out has uncovered alarming evidence of missed testing and gaps in the law. Abby Jones has been investigating how our farmers are being put at risk.
From a few isolated cases in the 1980s, bovine tuberculosis now affects large areas of England, and it's been steadily moving north and east. The number of herds affected by the disease almost doubled in Cheshire in the year to this June. In Cumbria, it increased fourfold. How to tackle the disease is controversial. But what is agreed is it must be controlled in an area known as the Edge, an area between high-risk counties in the southwest and low-risk counties in the north, an area where the disease is steadily spreading. I'm standing in Cheshire on the Edge, which also includes counties like Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. If the disease can't be controlled here, it could reach Greater Manchester, Merseyside, Lincolnshire and West Yorkshire by 2022. The government's so concerned about the Edge, it's introduced new measures like tougher cattle tests this month. But is that enough?
Come on! Come on!
Phil Latham farms on the Edge and in a high-risk area in Cheshire. Until a year and a half ago, he'd never had a case of TB.
Come on, Daisy, move along. Come on.
This year, 89 cows were slaughtered.
Emotionally and financially, very tough. Although we're cleared now, we still haven't adapted the business. We've decided to go from 500 cows down to 300 cows. That's meant making men redundant. That is a chap that is leaving today, actually, or this Sunday, who's worked for me for 25 years.
Phil hasn't bought in a cow in 16 years. He's certain badgers infected his cattle and welcomes the cull. But he believes farmers are also at risk because of problems with the AHVLA, the body which manages cattle testing.
It took 174 days between on our farm getting our first incidence of TB last year and my neighbours having to be tested. I think that's a ridiculous timescale. Just in terms of their paper systems, they seem to be out of control. We were told to get our cattle tested after they'd been shot. I have one neighbour who hadn't actually been tested for 20 years because AHVLA had forgotten to allocate him a test. And in order to do his test, it took over 40 visits to get him tested. I think that's a ridiculous waste of resource, and I think that's a fairly ridiculous way to try and control the disease.
When TB was discovered in Phil's herd, this farm was shut down. No cattle could come in or out, restrictions crucial to stop the disease spreading. But some farmers are breaking them. Anthony Kirkham is a cattle dealer who farms a few miles away. He's been prosecuted twice for moving cattle illegally while his farm was shut down with TB. Nearly 200 offences. We asked Mr. Kirkham to explain to us why he's repeatedly broken the rules, but he hasn't replied. He still has a licence to transport cattle across the country. Issued by the AHVLA again. It's the same body that shut down Mr. Kirkham's farm. But it doesn't refuse a licence for breaking TB rules. It says it's interested in making sure transported animals are well treated. For Richard Gardner from the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, that's not good enough.
I'll just try and put this wicket in here.
For the last year, the Trust's been vaccinating badgers against TB. It fears that work could be being undermined.
We're trying to find solutions to tackle bovine TB, and we're trying to offer a solution by vaccinating badgers. But we could be wasting our time if there's people out there still potentially moving disease around.
Away from Cheshire and the Edge, illegally moving animals is for some an even bigger worry.
They're trying to make the cattle worth more money. They're moving them from a dirty area into a clean area. It means they're worth more money.
I've come to Cumbria, a low-risk area, to meet a farmer who claims the law's being broken for profit. We've protected his identity.
You often see wagons from down south pull up. They unload animals at 10 o'clock at night, even later. and then the next morning they're loaded up by a different wagon and taken to auctions. On paper, it never happened.
How do you feel about that?
It's disgusting. It's not fair on us because we're TB free. It's a hard thing to sort it out. They are trying, but they need to be more ruthless to stop it.
Of course, the vast majority of farmers do stick to the rules, but are those rules strict enough to control TB?
Every week, tens of thousands of animals are bought and sold at auctions. I've come to a new auction in Kendal used by farmers across the north. On the screens here, limited information about the animal for sale. Auctions don't have room and aren't forced to provide more. So how confident can a farmer be in what they're buying?
There isn't enough information. They could buy an animal which they think's off a Cumbrian farm, but it could have moved from anywhere in the country, out of the southwest, out of the high-risk area, or anywhere virtually in the country.
The government does want to introduce a new system giving more information, doesn't it?
But it's only voluntary, isn't it? It's not mandatory.
And what do you think of that?
I think to stop this disease, we've played around with it too long, far, far too long. It's coming up the country at a rate of knots. We've got to do something about it, and we've got to make it mandatory. And the government have got to get a hold of this.
That's not the only bit of legislation Trevor wants to see changed. In low-risk areas, the neighbours of a farmer who comes down with TB have a 28-day window before they have to shut down their own farms.
Well, for that 28 days, they can move livestock and they can sell the livestock. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? All the rules around TB have to be tightened up.
But will that happen? The government is reviewing how to tackle TB to stop it spreading north. But it doesn't believe it should be compulsory for farmers to provide TB information at places like auctions.
At this moment in time, we don't believe it should. We need to get all the information in place. We need people to think about what they're doing. And this doesn't just apply to TB, it applies to other endemic diseases as well. So it's very much in the mind of the buyer as well as providing information.
And the 28-day window that Trevor wants to see removed?
The low-risk area has very, very low incidence of TB. Therefore, it's deemed the risk is minimal. However, it's something that we, as the Animal Health and Welfare Board, are looking at and have decided to review.
We asked the AHVLA about the problems we've exposed. It admits Phil Latham's neighbour wasn't tested, but says this was an isolated case. It denies farms had to wait 6 months for testing once the disease was actually confirmed.
It also insists testing is strictly managed, that cattle are registered on a national database and their movements recorded to make sure they're tested, that it imposes movement restrictions when testing's overdue and reports serious breaches to local authorities to take action, and that farmers who don't identify and record cattle correctly risk losing an EU subsidy.
Back in Cheshire, Phil Latham hopes enough will be done to halt the spread of TB, but he says he's yet to be convinced.
The perception that TB is spreading because farmers have poor practices and aren't clean or don't have decent biosecurity and it's all down to farmer activity, I'm afraid, is extremely misguided. The inexorable slide and spread of TB across the country and through all the cattle areas will continue unless a better policy and properly resourced policy is implemented. There's an awful lot of work still to do. Otherwise, we're going to have a situation in the country where a lot of the badgers throughout the country and a lot of the cattle throughout the country and further north than here are going to have TB, and that is an appalling vision of the future.